Good morning to our friends in Southeast Asia and Australia. Good evening to our friends in North America. I've been invited to give some Dhamma sharing to the group in Canada. It's my honor and pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. The subject that I have been asked to talk about is how do we apply the 7 factors of enlightenment in our daily life. So it's a very juicy subject. And the 7 bojjhanga, the 7 enlightenment factors. What's the first one? Bojjhango sati, sankappo, mindfulness. So we were just doing a guided meditation. We were doing breath meditation, a wonderful way to sharpen and clarify and establish this quality of presence of mind, truth discerning awareness. So in the Anapanasati Sutta, taught by Lord Buddha explains in the introduction that by sincerely and consistently practicing breath meditation, the 4 foundations of mindfulness can be fully cultivated. And in the process of fully cultivating these 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 7 factors of enlightenment are brought to fruition. So that's very important to note. I often feel that breath meditation is underestimated as a practice. Many people feel that they should do a little bit of breath meditation so that they can apply their mindfulness in other areas. And here Lord Buddha is saying, actually, breath meditation in itself is a practice that can fully fulfill the 4 foundations of mindfulness and bring to fruition, completion, the 7 factors of enlightenment. The other thing he says, of course, is that in bringing to fruition the 7 factors of enlightenment, the mind is liberated. It's a very fabulous paragraph. It starts with breath meditation and it ends with enlightenment. 1 paragraph. So we should notice this. Of course, not everybody has all day to practice breath meditation, but it's important. The reason I'm making the point is I think we do underestimate its value, because when we come to sit and you practice your breath meditation, you will be aware of feelings in the body. So you'll be aware of the body has come to sit, and you'll be aware of feelings in the body. So you're already developing mindfulness of the posture. You know what posture you're in. You're already developing your mindfulness of feelings that arise. And when you give your attention to the feelings associated with breathing, you have mindfulness of feelings. And then what happens? You're trying to be mindful of the breath, and you have all sorts of thoughts, don't you? And you might have dullness. And so you become aware of various other mind objects. And as the quality of mindfulness gets sharper, hopefully you begin to know this one's a wholesome one, this one's an unwholesome one, this one's a neutral one. Begin to recognize what is a spiritual power and what is a hindrance. And so a great deal of benefit comes from simply sitting down and closing the eyes and setting the intention to be aware of the in and out breathing. Develop a lot of mindfulness and wisdom if one does it correctly. So I do recommend starting your day with breath meditation before you get busy with other things, because it's through this act of meditating, formal meditation, trying to make one object the object of the mind. That's what develops some energy, another of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And that's what gives the presence of mind enough integrity and clarity that you can then try to apply it to other postures and other activities throughout your day. So if we are hoping to apply the 7 factors of enlightenment, cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment in our daily life, I would recommend beginning with breath meditation in the day, in the morning, before you get busy with other things. So that would also mean not looking at your phone yet, turning it off, and just or possibly having it in a different room, because these devices sending the mind out a lot, other people, other places, opening the mind to the lokadhatu, the worldly element, and the mind gets all sorts of sense impressions about all sorts of things. Don't do that straight away. When you wake up in the morning, meditate, establish clarity before you expose the mind to all of those things. The next factor of enlightenment is investigation into Dhamma. This is very important. So this is where having a sense of paying attention, mindfulness is sometimes translated as truth discerning awareness. I like that description. But there is delusion in the mind. If there wasn't delusion in the mind, we'd be liberated already. So the problem with delusion is that it deludes the mind. So you might not necessarily know that you're deluded. When we are deluded, oftentimes we don't know, unfortunately. This is why we need this quality of mindfulness. We need to start shining light and clarity into the murkiness, the grayness, the darkness, so that we can start seeing these things. Illuminate your mind with mindfulness. So we need to recognize delusion, and we need to apply antidotes. So this is investigation into Dhamma. This can also be reflective meditations. So suppose, for example, you tend to think a lot about the future. If you're a person who thinks a lot about the future and worries a lot about the future, Lord Buddha recommended the death meditation. So this is an investigation. You investigate the fact that you could die today through any number of means. You also should pay attention, you should ask yourself, of the various plans that I've made, how many of them went as I planned them? Because if we recognize truthfully that oftentimes the way we plan things is not how things go, then we might not invest as much energy. You might have a loose plan, a plan A, a plan B, a way that we hope things will go. But then you start paying more attention to the way things are going or what is possible. And so we need to recognize what are your frequent flyers in terms of delusion? What do you obsess about? What takes away energy from the present moment, and what destroys your clarity? Lord Buddha describes the 5 hindrances as bandits, as robbers, qualities which steal peacefulness. That's a very clear word. The Buddha didn't say these 5 hindrances are your friends sometimes. The Buddha said the 5 hindrances are robbers, bandits. So what are they? You've got your sensual craving, then you've got your irritation, your aversion, anger, sloth and torpor, dullness, sleepiness. And so the investigation of Dhamma is also kind of noticing what is present in the mind, and what are you doing that feeds it if it's a hindrance, and what are the remedies that you might need to apply, or the antidotes in aiming to make your mind a bit more balanced. So the next hindrance, of course, is restlessness, worry, anxiety, and the last is doubt. So if we are a person who's very prone to restlessness and anxiety and worry, what are things that you can do to stop exposing yourself to things that stimulate that? So if restlessness and worry takes away a lot of your clarity and a lot of your well-being, it's probably wise to limit the amount of news that you listen to and limit the amount of social media that you expose yourself to. These days, you open up your WhatsApp or your Line or whatever it is, and you literally never know what's going to come in. You're opening your sensitive mind to the worldly lokadhatu, the entire world, in a way that wasn't possible 10, 15, 20 years ago. But now it is. You can see something wonderful, inspiring, uplifting, and you can see something horrible, or you can hear some news which is terrible. This day and age, we hear news about everywhere all the time. It wasn't possible 50 years ago, a century ago. It might take 6 months to hear what happened 4 valleys away. So we need to recognize that it's a different time. Technology has changed things, and it's sensible to have boundaries with it. So how much entertainment do you expose your mind to? How much distraction? Because I think it's very important. You've invited me. I'm a forest monk living in Thailand on a mountain, sincere meditator. You've invited me to give you some Dhamma reflection. So I'm going to be a bit firm with you. Please allow me. many people feel, I'm just going to challenge you a little bit. Many people feel that their spiritual practice is the most important thing in their life. If you have this mindfulness and investigation into Dhamma, I want you to ask yourself, is it? Is it really? What I would like you to notice is how much time do you spend on social media and in watching entertainment compared to how much time you meditate. I would like you to notice how much you talk about politics, news, the economy, and relationships compared to how much you investigate Dhamma. And I think that most people will have to come to the conclusion that their spiritual practice is one of the important things in their life, quite possibly coming in at second or third. And that's normal. I'm not saying this in a scolding way, but what I'm saying to you is, if liberation is something that you really want, the 7 factors of enlightenment leading to liberation, then we do need to make our spiritual practice the most important thing. And if our spiritual practice is the most important thing, I would suggest that that would be demonstrated by the fact that when we get up in the morning, it's the first thing we do. And then as we go throughout our day, we will also find more time during the day to do some more. And we wouldn't put our head down on the pillow at the end of the day unless we've done a bit more before sleeping. So a very sincere spiritual practice with liberation as its goal, I believe, will have practice in morning, afternoon, and evening every day. And then you have a powerful spiritual practice. And then you are realistically laying the causes for some other of these factors of enlightenment. So with regards investigating Dhamma, knowing the quality of your mind, knowing the texture of your mind, knowing what's affecting it, knowing what you do to feed that, giving some consideration as to how you protect your mind and nourish the wholesome and abandon the unwholesome, put a sensible amount of constraint and restraint on entertainment and distraction. Be careful with harsh critical speech and gossiping. I think something happens in social media, doesn't it? Whereas it's a bit like road rage. When you're in an aluminium and glass container, you can get angry at other people because there's this perception of separation. So if you were face to face, you might not yell at a person, but if they bumped into you slightly, but if they're in a different car, you might, because it's perceived separation. They won't hit you back if you hit them. And I think with the anonymity of comments in social media, people can start becoming quite harsh and rude and mean in a way that they probably wouldn't be, but it does still affect the mind. So paying attention, what kind of comments do you make? And how are these things affecting your mind? So I think most of us can notice that in general, the world seems to be becoming more polarized. The left is going more left, the right is going more right. You're either very pro-vaccine or you're very anti-vaccine. There's not much in the middle anymore. And Lord Buddha is explaining to us that if we aspire to be, Ajahn Anan often says, keep the mind in the middle. It's the shortcut for practice. The fastest way to liberation is to keep the mind in the middle, not allowing it to be swayed by liking and disliking too much. That's the first hindrance. And the second hindrance, it's also the falling into the pleasure side, on the falling into the austerity side, which is not the middle way. You're trying to not fall into excessive sensuality, liking and loving and getting passionate, trying not to fall into excessive austerity and self-torture, hating, getting angry. So what can we do to support our mind to be more in the middle and to have more clarity? So this investigation into Dhamma is very important. It's not like just reading lists. The Dhamma is something, Ajahn Anan, my teacher, explains that the Dhamma wheel is something which rolls in your mind, in your heart. So right mindfulness, right concentration, right speech, which is going to come from right thought. This is all in your heart, in your mind. And Ajahn Anan explains that when the Dhamma wheel is turning in the heart, it's destroying greed, hatred, and delusion and ignorance. But if we neglect to have these qualities functioning in the heart, then greed, hatred, and delusion are actually destroying the Dhamma. So that's where the holy war is. we need to be establishing right mindfulness. We need to be establishing right thought so that we have right speech, which will manifest as right livelihood, all of these other things. So we do our meditation, we pay attention. What's my mind affected by? How can I support it to be balanced? So if you're falling into irritation often, or even anxiety, worry, depression, all of these things are kind of probably on the irritation aversion spectrum, then this is when we need to have some summative practices. We really do need to have several tools in our meditation kit. We need to be cultivating the metta. So I recommend doing metta practice for the first 10 or 15 minutes of every sit, if you're going to do a 45-minute sit. One of the reasons I recommend that these days is the world seems to have become a more dangerous and unpredictable place, and also the whole COVID phenomenon. There's a lot of distressing and sad news. So we need to maintain a healthy sense of self-care and well-being. So really establish loving kindness for oneself, and then train in radiating it to more numbers of beings and more classes of beings. The metta practice also really supports, Kanajana Nan also explains that cultivating metta helps us in developing our mindfulness, because you often notice that irritation and anger kind of destroys clarity. You might have a nice sit in the morning, then somebody says something, you get irritated, all the clarity, all the peacefulness is gone. Or if you react, kind of threw the peacefulness away. But if you have this capacity to hold the metta in the heart, someone else might say something irritating, you instantly feel your sensitized heart, which has loving kindness in it, you're able to hold that loving kindness in your own body-mind phenomenon while you're experiencing the irritating thing. You cannot react, you cannot have the irritation, and you also notice if an angry thought arises. It's like a mirror, and then you may not make karma with the speech. So metta bhavana is another wonderful and powerful practice for helping us contain our irritation and keep the mind balanced, and also having something wholesome to pick up that protects the mind from falling into unwholesomeness. This is why I recommend it, as my teacher recommended for me. I found it very helpful at the beginning of every session. Because what happens is, after a period of months, a period of years, you end up having quite a powerful metta practice, and you have an ability to pick up metta. It's like, oh, right now I'm suffering. Somebody said something that I find irritating, or somebody said something was hurtful, and I can instantly go to, may I be well, may I be happy, because in that moment I'm a suffering being and I recognize that. And it's like replacing by opposite. Instead of falling into feeling hurt, instead of falling into anger, I can pick up loving kindness and radiate loving kindness inwards. It protects the heart. And then you can radiate loving kindness to the person who might have used to irritated you, and not be irritated by what they say when your metta practice gets powerful. So then what happens if we have our mindfulness, consistent mindfulness, and our investigation into Dhammas? Bojjhango sati sankato dhammanang vitayova virya, so energy. Ajahn Pasana often says that effort has a direct correlation to energy. I would absolutely agree. It's putting forth all of these skillful efforts that gives rise to energy. So when we have energy coming from a good energetic practice, then these other factors of enlightenment can arise. Bojjhango sati sankato dhammanang vitayova virya, piyati, rapture. Pasadi, tranquility. So the good news is, the nature of your mind is that if we don't pick up the unwholesome, and if we keep it in the middle and we keep it balanced, and we cultivate right mindfulness and right collectedness, then by the very nature of your mind, it can experience tremendous rapture, tranquility, serenity. And this is everybody. This isn't software, this is hardware. Everybody has this. In being conscious, in having the human body and mind phenomenon, if you protect the mind from unwholesome objects, and if you train the mind to give attention to wholesome objects and sustain its attention on wholesome objects, and this truth discerning clarity, you will begin to have rapture and tranquility and serenity arise in your mind. We do need to maintain a consistency of practice to get this going. It's a bit like those old images of when people used to have to kickstart the car. You know, you have to kind of, the motor, you have to kind of wind it and wind it and wind it. And at a certain point, it starts humming and turning over by itself. But you'll notice to get the motor humming, it did take they had to be energetic in getting it going. Lord Buddha also explains the untrained mind as being like a wet stick in the swamp, and you need to take it out of the swamp and place it on the bank until it dries out before it can catch light. So this is why we need to be consistent in our practice, because otherwise it's like dropping the stick in the swamp again and then putting it on the bank again and then dropping it in the swamp again and putting it in the bank again. It's not going to fully dry out and catch light. But if we are diligent and consistent in our practice, and if we increase our practice to be doing more sessions per day, then the likelihood of you experiencing tranquility and rapture and serenity gets much, much greater. And Lord Buddha explains, peacefulness is the highest happiness. So it's really important to understand this, that dukkha, the first noble truth, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, is the nature of conditions. Yes, it's true. But there is pleasure, and some pleasure is praised by Lord Buddha as being harmless. And so the pleasures that are praised by the Buddha as being harmless is those pleasures that arise due to skillful and correct practice. So rapture and tranquility are very wholesome things. And what happens is a mind which has gladness. Suppose you have a practice of generosity and you have faith, very brightening, nourishing quality, and you're doing a good amount of practice, then this tranquility and wellness of mind, a kind of resilient quality of well-being. It's not like all misery and then at the end you become enlightened. That's not the way it works. Maybe for some people, particular karma, but for most people, you should start experiencing more well-being and developing skills about how to maintain a certain quality of goodness and tranquility and pleasure in the heart, wholesome pleasure coming from maintaining skillful objects of meditation and skillful ways of reflecting, learning how to let go of the unwholesome. So that mind which is experiencing well-being, a freedom of remorse, having a refuge and a path and a direction, that's what gives rise to samadhi, right collectedness, a quality of establishing a very profound sense of presence of mind. So for most people in this day and age, it takes quite a bit of effort to really experience samma samadhi. But whatever amount of collectedness we experience, it's important to understand that that is samadhi. So Ajahn doesn't really talk about jhana and not jhana. He talks about khanika samadhi, upajara samadhi, appana samadhi. It's all samadhi. So the khanika samadhi is when you get that feeling of some peacefulness, some collectedness for about 5 minutes. That's samadhi. What happens is as your samadhi deepens and ripens, it matures. If you steward it, that might become 15 or 20 minutes of serenity and tranquility with only a few wholesome thoughts arising. Or that'll be your upajara samadhi, your neighborhood concentration. And oftentimes it's more like in retreat type periods. If you start to be meditating 10 hours a day, then the chances of actually experiencing appana samadhi, very stable, unmoving sense of stillness, then that becomes possible. But it's all samadhi and it's all wholesome, and we should, in one level, we have to be content with the amount that we get without too much desire mind, because contentment while making an effort and increasing our efforts is a large factor in what gives rise to samma samadhi. So many people make a mistake where they get some experience of peacefulness and then the desire mind, they want more, go back and want to sit again, they want to get that again, and it doesn't happen. So we have to pay attention to what actually gave rise to a peaceful mind state. It was being consistently with the meditation object and dropping desire. simply by applying the mindfulness to knowing the meditation object, being with the meditation object, recognizing a hindrance and dropping it, then some samma samadhi arises. But if we come to the meditation pillar with, I want to be more peaceful, I want to be more peaceful, and that doesn't arise. So we have to recognize when we do experience peacefulness, what were the conditions that led to it, and then repeat that. The last of the 7 factors of enlightenment, equanimity. Very important. We all know how much misery we can cause ourselves by falling into desire, falling into irritation or aversion. So equanimity isn't indifference. It's a very misunderstood quality. Equanimity is equipoise, balance. For the mind to be truly equanimous, there's a lot of energy there, because if you don't have good quality of energy in your mind, you're not able to keep it from swaying. So there's a profound presence of mind for you to have true equanimity. And you're able to keep the mind in the middle, keep the mind balanced, remain serene. Ajahn Sumedho translates equanimity as serenity. It's a very beautiful quality. Other ways you can look at equanimity, it's like if you really understand praise and blame, for example. If you really understand that they're a pair and they come together, nobody only ever gets praise. Even the Buddha only got blame. I mean, how much energy do we waste and how much pain do we cause ourselves thinking about the thing that we think somebody shouldn't have said to us that hurt our feelings 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And if we can just accept praise and blame is normal, everybody experiences it, no matter whether you think it was right or wrong, or they should have or they shouldn't have. It's simply a phenomena that human beings must experience, even the Buddha. So we just, yeah, okay, that was blame. And this is praise. There's pleasure, there's pain. Keep the mind in the middle, trying to know them as equal phenomenon, arising, staying for some time, ceasing due to conditions. So pleasure is just this much, pain is just this much, praise is just this much, criticism, blame is just this much, a good reputation, a poor reputation, fame and obscurity, or fame and ill repute. Equanimity, the best way to cultivate equanimity, I believe, is formal meditation, because this is when you have the integrity of mind to notice these things arising, staying for some time and ceasing, all right, whatever they are, the pleasure, the pain, the praise, the blame, the attachment to it, the aversion to it. Once you see these things arise and fall away with more clarity and with more detachment, then you begin to understand, yeah, they're equal phenomenon, they're pairs, and we all have to experience all of them to some degree. And then also when you have those peaceful moments, whatever the hindrance was, whatever the kilesas were, when you're able to take the mind to a space of serenity and clarity, then you know what equanimity is, not being swayed by liking and disliking and just resting. And the more you're able to sit and watch a hindrance fall away and stop, and the more you're able to see whatever the mental formations are, whatever the proliferation is, when we're able to sit and just see it cease with a sense of clarity, then we trust that more and more, and we're able to bring this quality of clarity, mindfulness, and wisdom into our daily life, so that even when there are proliferations, reactions, there's a part of the mind that doesn't believe it completely, which is observing it. That's very, very important. Sometimes it's like in life, there's like 3 people in your experience. There's the one who's committed to the wholesome, and there's the one that just wants to have fun or wants to act out an angry reaction. And then there's the one that's observing them. I don't know if other people have that kind of experience, but sometimes for myself, there's a conversation between 3 people. Wholesome Dhammas, unwholesome Dhammas, and that which knows them. And so that which knows is hopefully having a good conversation with the unwholesome one and restraining it, and having a conversation with the wholesome one and encouraging it. But when we're able to see with clarity various hindrances arise and cease, various proliferations arise and cease, then we don't believe our opinions as much, and we don't believe our reactions as much, and we're able to bring this quality of meine, which Ajahn Chah talks about, not complete, not sure, bringing this quality of not completely believing even our own opinions. Was talking about how opinions have become so polarized now. It's like we have to have opinions, we can't not. We have to have our understanding of what we think is good and what we think is not good. But we don't have to believe it 100%, and we don't have to clobber other people on the head with it. It's like, this is my opinion. That's the opinion I have with the information I currently have. If I get different information, I'm willing to change it straight away. If I get more accurate information. And I don't have to prove that I'm right, and I don't have to contend with other people who I think are wrong. I just know an opinion as an opinion, and I try to hold it skillfully. So let's review again. 7 factors of enlightenment. We have mindfulness. We have to make to generate it and then maintain it before great efforts. So sometimes people think a large part of practice is just be mindful, just be mindful. If you want to be mindful, I would suggest to you that you have to clarify and establish mindfulness in the morning, so that throughout the day you can just be mindful, just be mindful. But if you're trying to just be mindful without putting some effort into clarifying a good quality of mindfulness, it's probably not going to be very effective. Investigation into Dhamma. So knowing what is wholesome, knowing what is unwholesome, knowing what is neutral, recognizing what affects your mind, and how to support the wholesome and how to abandon the unwholesome. You know, that's where we really want our investigation of Dhamma to be, in the area of your mind's at, what Dhammas are functioning in your mind, and how you support the wholesome and abandon the unwholesome. Which Dhamma lists, which Dhamma practices will support you in that process. Virya, energy. So we have to put energy into our practice. We have to make effort. Right effort gives rise to energy. Once we have a consistent practice, then we start to experience rapture, tranquility. This is a foundation for samadhi, right collectedness. And then we have equanimity. When equanimity is fully cultivated, I believe the 4th jhana is comprised of equanimity as a profoundly concentrated state, which isn't moved by liking or disliking and isn't even affected very much or tranquility anymore. And this equanimity on that level plays a very important role from what I've heard. Once a person becomes a stream enterer, it's the developed jhana, and that spending a lot of time in the 4th jhana is what really starves the roots of the greed and the hatred. They're just resting in this unmoving, not being swayed quality. So it's good to know where it goes, equanimity, and the role that it plays. So I hope that I've been able to say something useful to you and practical, and I do wish you success in your cultivation. If I said anything offensive, I ask forgiveness. I did want to make some time for questions and answers also.
Hanamayanda kataya sadhu karam dharamase sadhu 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 anumodami.
I have 3 questions actually. The first question is actually in respect of the phenomenon in related subject to rising and ceasing. Wonder you can share some of your techniques as to how to observe the in-between stage of rising and ceasing. So what should a meditator should observe? Normally the rising and ceasing is so fast.
Yeah, so I don't think we need to be observing arising and ceasing in every moment. What we need to have is a quality of presence that will recognize it when it occurs. So in between an in-breath, for example, there's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And if the mind is fairly peaceful, there'll be some stillness. And the stillness actually ceases. The thing is, we don't have enough mindfulness or clarity to notice the cessation of the stillness that is occurring. So the space also has an end. So we have to have clarity that notices when neutral phenomenon change as well. So you have the beginning, the middle, and end of an in-breath. The breath ceased. You have the space between the next breath, and that if the mind is in a somewhat peaceful state, you might not notice anything, but that neutral state also changes when the out-breath begins. Then there's another feeling to observe. So we have to, sometimes we're also just staying still and observing. And if you're not noticing any particular cessation in that moment, it's okay. But for example, when there is a feeling that impinges, that will be changing, and then it will cease. If there's a knee pain or if there's a shoulder pain, there will be. And then when the mindfulness gets really good, people will see that there's a lot of changing even amongst neutral feelings. There's arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing in neutral feelings. But I think what is important is the quality of staying centered and staying still and observing the cessation when you can. And then that's what makes the mindfulness sharper, and it will be able to observe it in more and more clarity with more and more phenomena, including the neutral and more subtle ways.
Yes.
Yes, my second question is, how should one handle doubt in general? Thank you.
Right. So I think recognizing it and not believing it fully. So this is where we have the doubt. You can actually apply your doubting nature to not believe your doubts. So this is where Ajahn Chah's recommendation to have a little bit of not sure awareness, not sure, whatever it is, not sure, not believing it completely. And sometimes it's okay to have doubts. And the Lord Buddha did say in doubtful matters, it's okay to have doubts. He didn't ban doubting. So suppose somebody's telling you something's good for you, but when you pay attention to the details a little bit more closely, you realize that that's probably bad for them. And it's okay to doubt that. So there are such things as wise and intelligent doubts. So one has to say, well, what is the doubt? Is it on something? And then it's okay if someone's telling you something's the truth and you're looking at them and you're recognizing that they're lying. It's okay to doubt that. If someone is good for you and you recognize it's harmful, then you doubt that. But if you doubt your ability to meditate, if you doubt your meditation object, well, that's something that's harmful, because you have to have confidence in your ability. So sometimes we have to, depends on what is the doubt about. If you Buddha's enlightenment, if you doubt the Buddha's teachings, if you doubt the existence of arahants, if you doubt the capacity of the meditation object, well, this can be harmful. So sometimes we have to challenge. If our doubts aren't intelligent or wise, then we have to challenge them. It's not because the person doubts their abilities or think they'll never be enlightened. That's not a reasonable doubt, because actually it's the potential of all conscious beings, and there's no exceptions. You can't have something which is a law of nature, which applies to some and not others. So you sometimes challenge your doubts. Say, no, just as the Buddha, before he was a bodhisattva and before he was a great spiritual practitioner, was an ordinary being who had a lot of kilesa and a lot of hindrances at some point. And so this demonstrates to us that ordinary beings have the most extraordinary potential. That's just a fact. The issue is, do we sow the causes diligently? So, yeah, so if the doubt is wise, you can have the doubt. And if the doubt's unwise, try to challenge it, try to stimulate faith, try to stimulate confidence.
Okay, thank you. The third question is actually related to mental volition or sankhara. What is the difference on the mental volition as to compare to the consciousness of the mind? What are the differences and similarity? Thank you.
So I think when we try to investigate the Nama Dhammas, it gets very tricky. So what I have to say is what Ajahn emphasizes. He's my main teacher, and I believe that he's now experiencing the result of liberating and purifying his mind. Ajahn recommends that the main focus that we practice is being aware of what you're doing with your body and being aware of the feelings of the body and investigation into the nature of the body. That's what he says, as well as metta. That's what he says we should give primary attention to. And the reason is, when we try to contemplate the Nama, they're very fast, and oftentimes we don't have the integrity of the mindfulness to be able to see them arising and ceasing, and we don't see the interlinking causal factors. And what happens in trying to make Nama Dhammas the meditation object, the mindfulness gets weak and the insight doesn't develop. But the body postures and the nature of the body and feelings arising due to body-based contact as the foundation, what happens is the quality of mindfulness gets more powerful. And then those insights into the between consciousness and sense contact and thoughts occur, but they occur when the mind has the integrity of mindfulness to see them. So where Sanatan recommends that we place our attention.
Yes.
Thank you, Ajahn Achalo, and it's a real delight to actually have a chance to speak to you. So my question is sort of in regard to a comment you made about having that presence of mind, knowing the unwholesome, the wholesome, and then this third presence of knowing. And I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a bit more.
Yeah. So in Thailand, there's actually a word which is used, which is called the Puru, the one who knows, which is probably better translated as that which knows. So when we first come to practice, that won't be established so much. But what happens is when we are consistent in meditation practice for a period of years, what happens is this quality of clarity that you can maintain throughout your day becomes more palpable. It's like you have a walking stick. You have this mindfulness with click, which is becoming more and more aware of mind states throughout the day. So it's a very good thing, and we depend on that. But it's not self. So sometimes when we use these analogies, you have to use the limitations of language, but it's as though there is a conversation between our bad habits that want to be reborn, our new habits that we're trying to maintain, and that which is kind of like refereeing or stewarding the process. And so this is why I personally recommend meditating morning and afternoon and evening every day. Not always sitting, it might be some walking meditation, or it might be, for some people, an energetic period of chanting, whatever works for different practitioners to establish a sense of presence of mind and clarity. And then we have the intention, very important to have the intention and the determination to maintain that sense of clarity through all postures and all throughout the day. Doing the practices that support that sense of clarity that can be maintained consistently through the day, then I think, do you have some experience of that, may I ask?
Of the clarity or the consistent practice?
Of being able to take that consistently through your postures through the day in your life.
Not consistently.
Right.
It's sporadic.
Right. So may I ask you how many sessions you do each day?
Oh, please don't ask.
Yeah, right.
No, no. I'm experiencing chronic pain, and
Right.
I'm really, really trying to find ways of practicing that don't aggravate that.
Right. So the walking practice is another practice which is often underestimated.
Yeah.
So, and it's a very big part of the forest tradition, actually. We just take the bottom of the feet as you walk, instead of the feelings of your breath, and it can be trained very similarly. Your anchor that becomes the kind of calm in the storm, that helps you generate clarity so that you can watch mind states. But if you don't have some kind of commitment to a regular formal practice, you won't be able to have that consistent clarity. That's the point. Mindfulness is a sankhara. It's something which has to be karmically, volitionally given importance. Presence of mind is something that we have to maintain. We have to establish and maintain that presence. It is a karmic formation which leads to that which is beyond karma. It's a condition which leads to the unconditioned. But because it is a condition, we have to bring it into being, and we have to increase its power, and we have to be consistent. So then the walking practice, for example, if you do need to lie down, well, maybe you chant while you're lying down. So you do something that brightens and energizes the mind while you're in the lying down posture. Various things that we have to do to establish a consistent sense of resilient clarity.
Great. Thank you, Ajahn.
Nice to meet you.
I had a meditative experience in a Vipassana retreat I went to, and I accidentally went into a very long meditation, and I saw the lights and everything. After a while, the lights went away. It changed colors, very bright. It went away, and then I had the feeling of going into a pit. Like, I was still calm, but I was going into space. Like, I feel like the floor just dropped, and I was just gravitating towards this. And because I have no sense of the body, so at that time, because I had spent so much time and effort to get to that peace, right? I did not want to come out of the meditation, because I could sit as long as I wanted, because there was no more pain and no more sound and no more body awareness. But that experience was so scary for me. Since then, now I realize that hindrance for me was the attachment to that feeling of losing the sense of I. And I wanted to understand, because I could never go back there again. I went to many meditation retreats, and I never ever got that kind of experience again. But could you help me to understand how outside of meditation we can understand this I contemplatively? How can we resolve that in a conscious manner? Thank you.
So it's very interesting, isn't it, that we get fed up with the self-view, with all of its likes and all of its dislikes and all of its disliking, and we really, really want some peacefulness. And then you actually let go of it for a few moments, and fear comes up, because there's I'm pretty sure that in that experience there wasn't fear, there was just peacefulness and having let go. The fear is, well, what I think occurred is the fear comes afterwards. So it's what the self-view then does with that experience. But the self-view finds it very threatening. And the thing that I would pay attention to is, that's a good number of years ago, you're still here and you're okay. And nobody ever died in a meditation posture from the meditation. I think Ajahn Prabhupada told me once that somebody died in a meditation retreat, but it was from a physical ailment. It wasn't from the meditation. So we need to challenge the fear. It's I think it's important to recollect that in the experience, the mind was peaceful and content. The mind is peaceful and content, and there's no sense of self there. The reason it's deeply peaceful and content is because there's no sense of self there. So this, and then what happened? The sense of self comes back. So the experience did destroy the self view. The important thing to understand is that having insight, having spiritual insight doesn't destroy the self, and it doesn't destroy the self. What it does is it helps a person, the practitioner, to understand it, what it is. It's a habitual way of seeing things, which is not the ultimate truth, but it's still conventional reality. And so what happens is, like, Ajahn Anan still has a personality. Lumpur personality. Ajahn Chah had a personality. Ajahn Chah liked forest mangoes. He told everyone to give up smoking for the sake of their health, and afterwards he still had the occasional cigarette. It's like these people have their personality traits, and Ajahn Anan is more likely to talk about devas and pastimes. Ajahn Biak is more likely to talk about the subtle abilities of blessing and protecting, qualities of blessing and protection. Lumpur Liam is unlikely to ever talk about these things. And so you have people who are liberated from greed, hatred, and delusion, who still have a latent personality. The point is, they've seen it as a habitual way of grasping at the body and mind, which has a relative truth, but is not the ultimate truth. But the point is, no matter how many peaceful meditations you have, when you come out of your peaceful meditation, you're still going to have a latent personality. It's not going to be destroyed. And it's okay. So I think that we need to bring the mind to a peaceful state in a sense of letting go again, to understand that, yes, in peaceful mind states, the sense of self is let go of. The mind comes out of the peaceful mind state and the sense of self comes back. And this is one of the ways we develop insights into it. It's like how this view arises due to conditions, and how we can reflect upon it to see that it's not the ultimate truth, and that when we become familiar with peaceful mind states, we become very comfortable with letting it go. It's kind of, oh, what a relief, get a break from that guy. And then we come out of the meditation, oh, he's back again, with his likes and his dislikes. And so insight and samadhi isn't going to destroy your personality. It's not going to make you crazy. It's going to help you understand it and bring more mindfulness to it, and have a skillful stewarding of its healthy functioning. But I think you need to challenge the fear of the experience and remember that you were peaceful in the experience, and you need to acknowledge the fact that years have gone past and you're okay. It didn't destroy anything.
Thank you, Ajahn. So any suggestions to how we can see this view outside of meditation contemplatively? Like,
yeah, so it's
yeah.
no. Basically, it's because you were doing at least 10 hours of sitting a day that it's possible. That's what made it possible, because you're in retreat. So unless you're at some advanced level, you can't bring your understanding of the ultimate nature of emptiness into your daily practice. This is something that has to be matured and repeatedly experienced many, many times. And then an advanced practitioner can be aware of the ultimate nature of emptiness while having a conversation. Must be really wonderful.
So Ajahn, so you are saying that we don't need to prepare our mind consciously and thinking about how to see this in a non-self view?
No, well, as I said, you need to meditate morning, afternoon, and evening every day. And then your right mindfulness will take care of the rest. You will have your insights, and your right mindfulness will give rise to right concentration. And these experiences will happen again, and you will understand them better. But you lay the causes, and the insights are what happens when you lay the causes. We don't try to get the insight again. That's the perfect way to obstruct it from arising.
Okay.
You just have to keep laying the causes.
Okay. So thinking about it will not help, you mean?
Well, no, because it's self, right? It's self having in the experience, it's an experience of letting go of self. And then what's coming is afterwards you're reinterpreting it with concepts. But the experience wasn't a concept, and there was no sense of self in the experience. So it's like, you just have to trust the Dhamma and keep practicing and understand you'll experience it again. And in a way, you have to just leave it in the past now. And don't worry about it.
Okay, so sorry, one last question. So like thinking the thoughts is not me, feelings is not me, it will not help.
Yeah,
This kind of
no, I think it's helpful. It is helpful, but you can't. It's we do as part of the morning chanting. Sanya, anicca, sanya, anatta. It is helpful. It's panya, sanya, wise perceptions, which will help reduce our attachment to it.
Well, I live in California. There's smoke, there's fire, there's brush all over, there's COVID, there's political instability, etc. And of course, there's the normal, expected, inevitable aging, sickness, and death. And I've been noticing kind of a background anxiety and the feeling that I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Do you have any other words of encouragement or advice about
So I think the COVID-related phenomenon. I remember in 10-day retreats that I used to teach, and I would say to people around about the 8th or 9th day, I remember saying this, that, you know, many of our parents and grandparents lived through really challenging and traumatic experiences, which we have largely been spared in this generation, whether it was the Great Depression or World War I or World War II. And we should recognize our extraordinary good fortune, and we should practice more, not less, not take that for granted, because the likeliness is it's going to change. Unfortunately, our current state of incredible good fortune and blessing is vulnerable. It always was. It was always going to change. And so on one level, samsara is just business as usual, and we're more affected by it. But for a sense of perspective, I think about 4.5 billion human beings live on less than $5 a day. So there has always been tremendous, well, not to say always, but in this particular point in the eon, there is tremendous difficulty and challenges. Samsara is a really rough place. But what do we do when we've lived with a certain amount of security and well-being and pleasure, and all of a sudden things got much harder? What do we do with that experience? Then I think this is where we need to be doing other supplementary practices that give rise to a feeling of joy, enthusiasm. We need to bring extra effort and energy. So even myself, I've been practicing for 25 years, and when I think of my friends going bankrupt and people committing suicide, and you know, the consequences of the lockdowns as much as the consequences of the virus, like even in a country like Thailand, with tens of thousands of bankruptcies and 40% increase in suicides, and you know, there's a lot of terrible, awful things happening. So for myself, I've actually recommenced a 3 steps, 1 bow practice, because so now I go down to the bottom of the hill where the monastery gate is, and I bow up towards the jetty, because I found that, you know, the near enemy to compassion is sadness. So you actually feel sad about all these people having such a miserable experience, or you see genuine cause for anxiety, like your life is becoming more difficult and may become much more difficult. So it's like there's a validity, the mind can really pick these things up, because it's, you know, on a conventional level, it's real. Things got scarier, things got harder. So what do you do with that? So even for myself, I found that like a full body practice, which requires a lot of energy for a period of hours, it really shifts, it can really shift a more heavy, more sticky mind state, so that by the time I've done that bowing for an hour, the mind is bright and happy, because I've taken the Buddha's enlightenment and my aspiration for liberation as my object in a very dynamic and fully engaging way. So it shifts the mind state. And it's like all of the terrible things are still occurring, but the mind was able to put it down and not give it its interest or focus for a period of time. Other people, it might be a particular chant that they like. So I was recently recommending the Jina Banjara Katha, visualizing the 28 Buddhas on top of your head and suttas and arahants all around your body, and doing it 9 times. Like, it's okay. In the past, we might have done 15 minutes of chant and half an hour sit, and it was enough, because life wasn't too painful. When life got much more difficult and much more complicated and much more scary, we need to really invest more into our spiritual practice so that it can be a real refuge. We need to have a more dynamic and more energetic practice. So even for myself, I find myself doing that. I'm doing more devotional chanting, and I'm doing more devotional practices which engage the whole body for a period of time to just shift these mind states so that it's more likely to experience peacefulness after that. So,
Thank you. That's very helpful.
and the other thing is it produces good karma as well. And the thing that's ultimately going to help us is the merit that we produce.
Yes.
So these things produce more good karma, which hopefully will bless and protect you or lead you to a safer situation if you need it.
And perhaps if people would like to say good night, that would be.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good too. Happy to spend time with you.
Thank
Wish
you
you
very
every
much.
success.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajahn. Bon appetit.
Good night, Ajahn. Have a good meal.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Joyce.
Hello, Ajahn Pavra. Hello, Ajahn.
Hi, Juan. Hello, hello.
Thank you, Vivian, for organizing this
Night.
talk. Good night.
Nice.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
Vivian.